The new hand sleeve knocked against the trough, and the sound it made was not the sound of a wrist. I kept my hands in the flour. I did not look up. In a bake hall at 2 in the morning there are 100 small noises, the ovens ticking as they cool, the scrape of a peel, Hans Sturrock's bad hip complaining every time she crossed the stones, and any one of them can cover a man's thinking. So I let mine be covered. I turned the dough, folded it, turned it, and I listened to the girl on the far side of the long trough learn very quickly to keep her left arm tucked in. Iron, a short blade, sheathed, sewn flat along the inside of the forearm where the sleeve is loosest. I had carried one that way myself when I was young and stupid, and the trick with it is that you must never, ever lean on a table. She had leaned on my table. "Wetter," Hans said to her from down the line. "That's a brick you're making. Wetter, and don't be gentle with it, it isn't a baby." "Yes, mistress." 2 words. Flat northern vowels with something else underneath them, something rounder, southern, worn down like a coin carried too long in a pocket. She had given her name at the door 3 days before as Tallies. No family name. No pack behind her, no scent of one on her at all, which in the Harrow mark means either that you were born to nothing or that you have been very careful for a very long time. I finished my fold and set the dough to rest under its cloth, and I did not call the guard. Understand me, I could have. Anselm Rook slept 40 feet away with his boots on. 1 word and she would have been on the floor with her arm behind her, and the knife on the table between us before the ovens had lost a degree, and by dawn I would have known who sent her, because Rook is patient and men talk. I did not say the word. I want to be plain about the reason, because everything that came after grew out of it. For 14 years I had been waiting for someone to come and do exactly this, and I had begun to be afraid that no one ever would. You will have heard about me even if you have never crossed the march, and what you have heard is this: that Osric Brand murdered a man under truce cloth at the Grey Barrow, and that the moon has never forgiven him for it. Here is the part that is true. 14 years ago the Turnfast War ended badly, the way wars end when both sides have run out of young men rather than out of reasons. I was 22 and 11 days a king, because my father had died of a chest cough in a tent in the rain like a common soldier, and the crown came to me while it was still wet. I sent word south to Corin Varden, warden of Oslo, who had beaten me at Skello Ford and would have beaten me again at Harrow Water, and I asked him to meet me at the Grey Barrow under white cloth so that we could stop. He came. He was 54 years old, and he came with 9 men and no helmet, because a man under truce cloth does not wear a helmet, and that is the whole of what a truce is. It is a man agreeing to be easy to kill. I was not at the barrow that night. That is also true, and it has never once helped me. I was 8 miles off, sitting up with 200 levies who had not been paid in a season and were talking about walking home. I left the barrow in the hands of my cousin Havard Craik, who was 30 and clever, and had lost a brother at Skello Ford. In the morning Corin Varden was dead on the turf with his truce cloth still knotted at his shoulder, and 8 of his 9 men with him, and the 9th run off south with the news, and the news was, the Brand boy did it. He called us in, and he did it. I rode there at dawn, and I stood over him. I remember the frost on his beard, and I remember thinking, with the flat, useless clarity you get after a bad night, this is the end of my life, and I am 22. Havard came and stood beside me with his hands open and said, very quietly so that only I could hear it, "Cousin, say it was a rising. Say it was the levies out of hand and no man's order. Say anything you like. But if you say my name in front of them, the march goes to war with itself before noon, and it will not stop for 20 years. He was right. That is the ugliest thing about him, and it has never stopped being true. He was right. So I said nothing. I let the story stand the way it fell. I let the South believe that I had called an old man out under white cloth and cut him down, because the alternative was 2,000 men of the Harrow mark killing each other over which cousin to follow, and I had just spent 4 years watching what that looks like. I told the 11 of our own men who knew better that they would carry it silent to their graves, and I made them swear it, and they have kept it, because I asked them to. I was 22, and I thought I was buying peace, and I was. It cost what it cost. The march gave me back a name for it. They call me the Oathbreaker King, mostly not to my face. They obey me. They are not fond of me. The wolves of the march run in my hills, and they have never once run to my hand. And every man who sees that draws his own conclusion, and his conclusion is the right one, only for the wrong reason. And every year, from the first hard frost to the first green, I bake. That is the other thing you will have heard. It began as nothing, the second winter after the barrow, a bad one, and the grain hall at Brandhold sitting full while people 2 valleys over ate the seed corn. I opened the ovens and put my own hands in the trough because I could not sleep anyway, and because I wanted one time to make a thing that went into a person and did them good. Then I did it the next winter. Then the next. Now the march jokes about it, the king who bakes. 6 ovens going in the long hall under the south wall from Frostmonth to the green. All night, every night, and any soul who walks in off the road gets a loaf in their hands and no questions about where they've come from. And I am there at the trough, most nights with my sleeves shoved up like a hired man. The march thinks it is penance. That is close enough to write that I have never corrected it. But here is the thing nobody in the march knows, and it is the reason I said nothing about the knife. I have not been able to taste any of it, not one crumb, not since the barrow. It went the same week Varden died. Bread, meat, salt, honey, wine, all of it turned to warm nothing in my mouth like chewing paper. 14 years. The healers had names for it, and none of the names did anything. I ate because a body must. I baked 10,000 loaves for other people's mouths, and I could not have told you if a single one of them was any good. So when I say I had been waiting for someone to come, I mean it in a way I could not have said out loud to Rook, or to Han, or to any council in the world. I had been waiting for the bill. She had hired on at the wrong time of year, to be honest about it, and Han had taken her anyway, because in the Hunger Gap you take any hands that come. The Gap is the 6 worst weeks in the Harrowmark, and nobody outside it understands why. It is not the deep of winter. The deep of winter is fine. The deep of winter has stores. The Gap is the end, the thaw, when the snow goes off in a week of filthy rain and the turf turns to black soup, and the road is impassable in both directions, and the last of the barley is gone, and there is nothing green yet, nothing, not a shoot, and every household in the march opens the last crock and looks at how little is in it. People do not starve in the snow here. They starve in the mud, in the wind, with the first warm smell in the air, 5 weeks from the first crop. That is the joke the country plays on us. It kills you inside of the fix. So from the Gap on, the ovens do not go out at all, and the hall takes anyone who can lift. She could lift. That was the first thing I noticed about her. Before the knife, she carried a full sack of meal up the step from the undercroft without setting it down halfway, and she did it with her knees correctly, like someone who had been carrying things since she was small. She was perhaps 22. Brown, plain, a little underfed, with hair the color of wet bark scraped back under a cloth, and a face that did not do anything. That was the second thing. Her face did not do anything. Not fear, not deference, not the quick, anxious brightness the new hands wear for the first fortnight. She looked at the ovens, and she looked at the trough, and she looked at me, at the king of the Harrowmark with flour to his elbows, and her expression did not change by the width of a hair, and she went to work. I thought, that is a person who has already decided something. On the 3rd night the knife knocked the trough, and I knew what she had decided. I want to tell you the next part exactly as it happened, and it is going to sound as though I am making it up to be pretty. I am not. It happened in the middle of the ugliest, most ordinary hour of a working night, and I have gone over it 10,000 times since. 4th night. Han had put her on the tray run, which is the worst job. You take the cooled loaves off the racks and carry them out into the yard where the folk from the road are waiting in the rain, in the mud, and you put them into hands and come back for more, and you do it 40 times, and the wind takes the heat out of you in the first minute. Nobody likes the tray run. It is given to the newest hand as a kind of test. She did not complain. She went out and came back, out and came back, and each time she came back she was wetter and her hands were redder and her face still did not do anything. I was at the second oven with the long peel, drawing the third bake. And on the last tray there was a loaf gone wrong, one that had split badly along one side and swelled out into a crooked ear, the sort we keep back rather than hand out, because a hungry family looks at a broken loaf and thinks they've been given the leavings. I broke the ear off to throw it to the dogs. Then I stopped, because she was standing at my shoulder waiting for the tray, close enough that I could feel the cold coming off her wet sleeve, and something in me said, with a kind of flat authority I had not heard from myself in years, "Eat that." So I ate it, out of nothing but tiredness. A torn end of overbaked barley bread, still hot enough to hurt, and I put it in my mouth without thinking about it at all. And the world came back. I do not have better words than that, and I have looked for them. It was salt. It was the sweet sour of a good ferment and the bitterness at the edge where the crust had gone too dark, and it was warm and it was there. It was actually in my mouth being a thing, after 14 years of eating warm paper in the dark. It went through me like being struck. My eyes ran. I had to put my hand flat on the oven bricks hot, and I felt that too. I felt the heat as a specific fact rather than a rumor, and I stood there in my own bake hall with a torn crust in my fist and my sight gone to pieces, and behind me Hand Sturrock said, "Sire," in a voice she had not used to me since I was 9. And the new hand, standing at my elbow with a tray in her raw hands, said nothing at all. She only looked at me. I turned my head and I looked back, and there it was, plain as a struck bell. Her. It was her. She was the whole of it. The taste came in because she was standing at my shoulder and not 1 inch further off, and I knew it the way you know your own name, and I want to be honest. My first feeling was not tenderness and it was not wonder. My first feeling was a sort of horror, because I had spent 14 years being certain that whatever the moon owed me had been struck off the account, and here it was, 4 days into the hunger gap, in a wet apron, with my death sewn into her sleeve. I said, "What's your name?" She said, "Tallies." She was lying. I had known that since the door. It was not even a good lie. She said it the way you say a word you have practiced. I said, "Tallies, take the tray out." She took the tray out. I put the rest of the crust in my mouth, and I chewed it, and I tasted every part of it. And then I set both hands on the trough and stood there with my head down until my breathing was mine again. Hand came and stood by me with her arms folded, 61 years old, 4 inches shorter than my shoulder, entirely unafraid of me since the day she caught me stealing dough at 9 and cuffed my ear for it. "You've gone gray," she said. "I'm tired." "You're a liar and always were." She looked at the door where the girl had gone out. Then she looked at me, and Hand Sturrock has a way of looking that goes in under the plate. That's a strange one. "Yes." "No pack on her." "No." "Cut turf, I'd say, by the hands." "And something else." She rubbed her thumb along her jaw. "She came up the South Road, sire, in the Gap. Nobody comes up the South Road in the Gap." "I know," I said. "Put her on the ovens tomorrow." Hand's eyebrows went up. New hands do not go on the ovens. New hands do the tray run for a month, then the trough for a season, and the ovens when Hand decides, which for some is never. "Why?" "Because I want her where I can see her," I said, which was the truth, and Hand took it for something else entirely and went away satisfied. Anselm Rook found me at dawn in the yard, which is where he finds me when he means to say something I will not like. He is 50, built like a gatepost, and has been my second since the year I could not have found my own boots. "The new one," he said. "What about her?" 12 years I've watched that door for you. He did not raise his voice. Rook has never raised his voice in his life. She's not what she says. No. You know that. Yes. He waited. When I did not go on, his jaw worked once. Sire, there's a blade in her left sleeve. So he had seen it too. I felt something odd then, not alarm. Something closer to pride, that my house was as well watched as I had paid for it to be. I know, I said. Then let me take it off her. No. Then let me put her out on the road. No. Rook breathed in through his nose. Behind him, the yard was filling with the gray, wet light and the smell of the mud, and a line of folk from the road were shuffling up toward the hall door with their sacks, and one of them was a woman with a baby slung in her shawl who had walked, I later learned, 19 miles. You want to tell me why, he said, or shall I guess and be insolent? Guess. You think she's come from Oslo? I said nothing. 14 years, Rook said. 14 years I've stood behind you while men spat on the road when you rode past, and you never once said the word that would have fixed it, and I have never once asked you why, because I know why, and I've never agreed with it for a single day. His voice did not change at all. And now there's a southern girl in your kitchen with a knife up her sleeve, and you're going to put her on the ovens where you stand all night with your back turned. Yes. Sire. Anselm, I turned and faced him. Nobody touches her. Not you, not the guard, not Han, nobody. She keeps the knife. Nobody searches her, nobody follows her, nobody so much as looks hard at her in the yard. That's an order, and I'll have it repeated back to me. He looked at me for a long moment. He is not a stupid man, and he had already worked out most of it. Nobody touches her, he said. Sire, if she... Then she does, I said. Say it back. Nobody touches her. His mouth was a flat line. And when she puts it in you, and I'm stood outside the door doing as I'm told, what am I to say to the march? I thought about it. Tell them the bill came, I said, and it was paid. She was very good on the ovens. That surprised me, and I have thought about why it shouldn't have. A person who has been waiting for one particular hour for years learns a kind of patience that is worth more than any skill, and the ovens are nothing but patience. The wood down to coals, the coals raked out, the floor swept, the hand held in at the mouth to feel the heat and know from that alone whether it will take a bake or want another quarter hour. You cannot hurry it and you cannot measure it. You feel it or you don't. She felt it. Third night on the ovens, she pulled a full bake out at exactly the right minute without being told. 48 loaves, every one of them right. And Han looked at them and looked at her and said nothing, which from Han is a coronation. I set myself to learn her, and she set herself to learn me, and we did it 18 inches apart across a trough for 6 weeks, and I will tell you plainly that it was the happiest I had been since I was 22 years old. I taught her bread. That is what the two of us actually did, and I could give you the whole of it. How you do not need so much as fold. How a dough that fights you wants water, and a dough that sags wants time. How the barley here needs a 1/5 part of rye, or it eats like sand. How you cut the top not for prettiness, but to tell the loaf where to open so it doesn't tear itself in the heat. She said the first time I told her that, you give it a wound so it doesn't make its own. That's it exactly. That's a hard way to say it. It's a hard country. She almost smiled. It went across her face and was gone like a bird past a window, and I stood there with my hands in the flour and thought, God help me. She was not friendly. I want that understood because in the years since, people have told this back to me as though she came in and charmed my whole hall, and she did nothing of the kind. She was flint. She spoke when spoken to and half the time not then. She had no interest whatever in my rank. She called me sire because Han did, and for no other reason I could ever detect. When I said something stupid, she let it sit in the air until I heard how stupid it was. The 5th night I said something about the road folk in the yard, something easy and lordly, about how the march looked after its own, and she said, without looking up from the trough, "You're not looking after them, you're feeding them. That's a different thing, and it stops in 5 weeks." The hall went quiet the way a hall goes quiet. Han actually put her hand over her mouth. I said, "Go on." She looked up then. 19 miles, she said. The woman with the baby. She walked 19 miles for a loaf that'll last her 4 days, and then she'll walk it again. There's a granary at Fell Hollow 11 miles nearer with your seal on the door and nothing in it, because the march doesn't move grain in the gap because the roads go. So they walk. Every year. That's not looking after. That's making them come to you and calling it kindness. Rook by the door went the color of a brick. I said, "Whose granary is Fell Hollow?" "Yours, sire." "Who keeps it?" "Man called Ferric." "And why is it empty in the gap?" She held my eyes. "Because he sells it off in frost month when the road's still hard and the price is up, and fills it again in summer, and the ledger comes out level at year's end. Anybody who's ever waited outside it knows. You could know it too if you asked anyone but the man who keeps it." The whole hall was watching us. I felt the heat of the ovens on the side of my face, and I thought, quite clearly, this is the woman who has come to kill me, and she has just told me the single most useful thing anyone has said to me in 4 years. "Rook," I said. "Sire." "Send 2 riders to Fell Hollow tonight and count what's on the floor. If it's short, bring Ferric here and bring the ledger, and don't tell him which one you want more." "Sire." I turned back to the trough. She had already gone back to her folding, and her face had gone back to doing nothing. "Tallies." "Sire." "What else does everybody know that I don't?" She said a great deal, and put her dough in the bowl. The bees were 3 days after that. Brandhold has a hive shed built into the south wall, 10 steps under a slate lip, and it had been my mother's and after her nobody's. The man who kept them died the year of the bad chest cough, and I never replaced him, and every year since I had meant to and not done it, and the colonies had dwindled from 10 to 4 to, that spring, too. I went round the wall at first light to see whether they had come through the gap, and she was there. She had the skep lifted. No smoke, no veil, no gloves, her sleeves pushed up past the elbow and both hands down in among them, and they were all over her on her wrists, along her forearms, one walking the ridge of her knuckle. And she was not still, that is the part I could not get over. She was working, lifting, turning, and they went round her hands like water goes round a stone. I stopped about 10 feet off. She glanced up. "They'll not go for you if you stand there," she said. "Don't stand in the line, that's all. They come out and go up. Stand aside of it." I stood aside of it. "They're starving," she said. "Both. This one's got a fistful of stores left and there's nothing out yet. Willow's a fortnight off. They'll die in sight of it. Like everything else here." "Yes," she set the skep down gently. "You'll want sugar and water 2 to 1, warm in a shallow dish with straw in it so they don't drown, every night till the willow's out. It's not honey and they'll not thank you for it, but they'll be alive." "Can you do it?" "I'm on the ovens." "Do it before the ovens." She looked at me. It was the first time I ever saw her hesitate, and I understood it later. She was working out whether taking on a second duty was a thing a woman in her position ought to do, whether it tied her down, whether it made leaving harder. "Yes, sire," she said. I said, "Where did you learn it?" And there, right there, she made her only real mistake in 6 weeks. "My father kept 40 skeps," she said. "You learn." "Kept past 40. And that flat southern round under the vowels, and a girl of 22 who had walked up the south road in the gap. 40 skeps is not a cottager. 40 skeps is a house with land and a name." I did not let my face move. I have not much talent, but I have that one. 40, I said. He must have been a patient man. He was. Where? She picked up the second skep and turned it in her hands and said, "South." and that was all she gave me, and I did not push, because I had what I needed and because I found. And this was the thing that frightened me most in all of it, that I did not want her to have to lie to me any more than she already did. I went back round the wall and stood in the mud out of sight of her, and put my hand flat on the cold stone. 40 steps south. A knife in the sleeve, a face that does not move. Varden, I thought, you had a daughter. I had known it. Somewhere I had known it since the trough. But there is knowing and there is having the number of the hives, and after that I could not pretend to myself any longer, and I had to decide what kind of man I was going to be for the next 6 weeks. I decided badly. I decided to teach her to bake and say nothing, and let her choose her hour. I have been asked since whether that was courage. It was not. It was the opposite. It was a man who had been carrying a stone for 14 years, being offered, at last, a place to set it down, and taking it without asking what it would cost her. 3 times I put the thing within her reach, and I want to set down what she did each time, because it is the whole of what she was. The first was the night after the hives. I fell asleep at the trough. Genuinely, I had been up 2 nights over the Fell Hollow business, and Ferrick's ledger, which was a marvel of neat arithmetic and complete fiction, and I sat down on the bench by the third oven with my back against the warm brick and went out like a snuffed wick. When I woke, the hall was empty but for the 2 of us. The bake was in. It was the dead middle of the night. She was 6 feet away with the ash rake in her hands, and my back had been turned to her, for Han told me afterward, and enjoyed telling me, the better part of an hour. She had not moved. She had raked out the 5th oven and swept the floor of it and set the kindling for the morning, all of it quietly, so as not to wake me. I said, how long was I under? A while. You should have kicked me. You needed it, she said, and went on raking, and that was all. The second was 11 days later. There was a boy of about 9 in the yard, one of the road folk, who got in among the horses and went down under a cart horse's feet in the mud, and the whole yard was shouting, and I went in and got him out from under and came up with him held against my chest and my own guard's spear butt swinging round about a hand's width from the back of my skull, because the boy's mother had hold of the man's arm and was hauling at him, and he'd lost the end of it. Any competent person in that half-second, with the king off balance and turned away and every eye on the horse, any competent person could have done anything at all. I know she was there because I heard her. She was the one who got the horse's head round and calmed it, and she did it by getting in front of it, which is not the safe side. The third was the last week of the gap, and it was deliberate on my part, and I am not proud of it. I left my own knife on the trough. Not a dough blade, my knife, the one that had been my father's, 8 inches, and I put it down at her elbow and walked to the far end of the hall and turned my back and stood there for a count of 200, doing nothing, in an empty hall at 3 in the morning with my shoulders square to her. When I turned round, she had cleaned it and set it point-away on a folded cloth, the way you hand a blade to someone you don't wish to insult. She said, you'll want to keep that off the boards. Flour pits the steel. And then she looked at me straight for a long moment, and I understood that she knew exactly what I had just done and exactly why, and that she was furious. Don't do that again, she said. No, I said, I won't. She picked up the cloth and went out to the hives. I stood in my own bake hall and thought, she is not slow and she is not a coward, and she has had 3 clean chances she did not take, so she does not want my death. She wants something else first, and whatever it is, she thinks she can only get it from me alive. I should have been relieved. What I actually felt, standing there, was a kind of cold dread, because there is only one thing a Varden could want from me that is worth more than my blood, and it was the one thing I had sworn 11 men to silence over. The moon settled it the next week, and it settled it in front of everybody, which is the moon's way. I found mine in a pail. That is not dignified, but it is what happened. I bent over the water pail in the yard to sluice my face, and there was my own reflection looking back with a streak of white in the hair above the left temple, an inch wide, running back from the hairline, as though someone had drawn a thumb through it with flour on it. I have brown hair going gray at the sides like any man of 36. This was not that. It was white as a hound's blaze, and it had not been there the night before. Every child in the Harrow mark knows what it means, because every grandmother tells it. The moon marks a true pair at the temple, one each, the same side, so that neither can hide it and neither can claim it alone. Most people never see one. My grandfather had one and my grandmother had its twin, and they are still spoken of. You cannot cover it, you can, of course, a hood will do it, but the point is that everyone knows you are covering it. I stood over the pail for a long time. Then I pulled my hood up and went in, and I did not look at her all night, and I made a very poor job of not looking at her, and Han watched me do it with an expression I did not enjoy. Hers came 4 days later, and she did not hide it at all, because she did not know what it meant. She came in out of the dark with her cloth pushed back off her hair, and there it was above her left temple, an inch of white, exactly the same, and the hall, 30 people, hands in troughs, trays on shoulders, went absolutely silent. She stopped. She looked round at all of them. She put her hand up to her hair, felt nothing, and took it away. "What?" she said. Nobody answered her. Han Sturrock crossed the floor, took my hood in her fist, and pulled it back off my head in front of my entire household, which is treason, and stood there holding it while the two of us faced each other down the length of the trough, with the ovens going behind us. And I watched her understand. It took about 3 heartbeats. Her face, that face that did not do anything, did something. It went white, and then it went through about 4 things I could not name and stopped on the last one, which was the only one I did recognize, because I had felt it myself 4 days earlier over a water pail. It was grief. She looked as though something had died. Then she turned round and walked out into the yard. The hall stayed silent. Han let go of my hood. "Sire," she said, in a voice that had gone rather odd, "in 30 years I have never asked you for anything." "Get back to work," I said. "All of you, the bake will burn." They got back to work. I went out after her. She was standing at the wall by the hive shed with her arms wrapped round herself and her back to me, and the wind was coming off the black pine with rain in it, and she did not turn round when I came up. I stopped a proper distance off. "You'll want to know what it means," I said. "I know what it means." Her voice was steady. That was somehow worse. "We have the same tail in the South. We call it the thumbprint." "Then you know I didn't choose it." "I know that. And you know I can't take it off." "I know that too." She turned round. Her eyes were dry and absolutely furious. "Do you know what you've done to me?" I said yes. That stopped her. She had been braced for a denial, and I have never in my life given her one of those. "Say it then," she said. "You came here to do a thing," I said. "You've had 3 chances and you didn't take them, and I know why you didn't, and I'll come to that. And now the moon's put a mark on your head that every soul in this march can read, and it says you belong to the man you came for, and it means that whatever you do now, whether you do it or you don't, there is nobody left in the world who will believe you did it for a clean reason." I stopped. "It's taken your right from you. That's what it's done. It's made your grief look like a lover's quarrel." She stared at me. Then she said very low, "Who am I?" And that was the moment. There it was at last in the wind at the foot of my own wall. I said, "You're Corin Varden's daughter." She did not move. "How long?" "The hives," I said. 40 skeps and a southern mouth. Before that, I knew you were from Oslo, and I knew what was in your sleeve, and I've known that since your 3rd night, and no one has laid a hand on you because I gave an order that no one would. Your 2nd knows. My 2nd has wanted you off the place for 6 weeks and has obeyed me instead, and it has cost him more than it's cost you." She looked down at the mud. When she looked up again, her jaw was set. "Then why am I alive?" "Because you're owed," I said. Owed what? And there it came out of her at last, 6 weeks of it, and her voice cracked straight down the middle. My father went out to that barrow with white cloth on his shoulder because a boy of 22 wrote him a letter saying stop. He was 54. He'd have one. Everyone at Oslo told him not to go, and he went, because he said if there's a chance to stop then a man goes, and he took no helmet, because that's what the cloth means. And you. She stopped. She pressed the heel of her hand hard against her mouth for a moment and got herself back. I was 6, she said. They brought him home in a cart. I have spent 14 years being told what you are. And I got here and you were up to your elbows in flour at 2 in the morning feeding a woman who'd walked 19 miles. And you listened to me about Fell Hollow, and you put your own knife down at my elbow and turned your back like a... She made a small, wretched sound, half a laugh, like a man who wanted it over with. Yes. Why? The wind came round the wall. Away over the pines the light was going. Because it was never mine to pay, I said, and I have wanted for 14 years to find one person in the world I could say that to. She went very still. Say it again, she said. I didn't kill your father. My voice came out flat and strange. I had not said the words aloud since I was 22. I wasn't at the Grey Barrow. I was 8 miles off with 200 unpaid levies, and I have 11 men who will swear it, and every one of them is sworn to me not to. That's a lie. It isn't. It's a lie you've had 14 years to make good, and you never once. No, I said. I never once. Why? And that is where I stopped, because we had come to it, to the thing that was worse than the murder, worse for me, and as it turned out, immeasurably worse for her. She saw me stop. She saw exactly what it meant. You know who did, she said. I did not answer. You know who killed my father. Behind us, up the yard, a horn went at the outer gate 2 notes, the muster call, and there was shouting, and hooves on the causeway, and the whole of Brandhold turning out into the wet dusk to meet the levies coming in for the Gap muster. And at the head of them, on a good gray horse, with his hood back and his hand up and half the march cheering him because half the march has always liked him better than me, rode my cousin Havard Craik. I said yes. Havard Craik came into my hall the way he has come into every room since we were boys, which is as though he has just done you a favor on the road and is too well bred to mention it. He was 44 now, and it suited him. Gray at the temples, weather in his face, a good cloak worn carelessly. He came up the length of the hall with the mud still on him and took my hand in both of his, and behind him 140 levies of the Western Vales were pushing in out of the rain and being handed hot loaves at the door by my kitchen, and every one of them saw him do it. Cousin, he said, you look starved, don't they feed the king? Not so far. He laughed. He has a good laugh, that has always been the trouble. 206, he said. Better than last year. Ferndale sent none, Ferndale never sends any. I'll ride down and put my boot through his door in the summer. He took the cup Hand brought him and drank it standing. God, it's foul out there. Is the hollow road still under? Under. It's always under. He set the cup down. You want to put a causeway through the hollow, Osric. Stone. I've said it for 6 years. That country's got no back to it, and every spring you lose the whole south of the march for a month. With what money? With mine, if you'll let me. He said it lightly and looked at me over the rim, and I let it go past, and he let me let it go past, and that is how my cousin and I have talked for 14 years. Then he turned to take the room in, the levees, the hall, my household coming and going with the bake, and his eye went along the line of the trough and stopped. She was on the second oven with the peel in her hands. Her cloth had slipped back again. The white streak stood out above her left temple in the firelight like a chalk line on slate. Craik's face did not change. He is very good. He is better than I am. But he stood a half-second longer than a man stands, and then he turned back to me and said, easily, You've got the moon on you. I have. Well, he smiled. He put his hand on my shoulder and gripped it. Well, cousin, 14 years a stone and now this. Who is she? Whose house? She's a hired hand. She's not. She hired on in frost month and she can read an oven better than Han, and I've asked her nothing else, I said, and I'd take it kindly if the March did the same. He looked at me for a moment with real, warm, dangerous affection. You've never known how to be lucky, he said. You'll want a wedding in the summer then. Do it properly. Do it at the kindling if you like. You've got the whole March in the yard and nothing to spend on it but bread. He picked his cup back up. God knows this country could do with a day that isn't about the barrow. He drank. He did not look at her again all night. Not once. I watched him not look at her for 4 hours, and by the end of it my hands were cold. I did not sleep. At about 3, I went down to the hall and it was empty and cooling, and she was sitting on the bench by the third oven with her elbows on her knees. I sat down at the other end of it. We were quiet a while. Out in the dark the levies were snoring under the sheds and somebody's dog was going at something. Tell me the whole of it, she said. So I told her the whole of it, and it took an hour, and I did not make it pretty because there is no pretty in it. The letter I wrote at 22, in my own bad hand, with the crown 11 days on me. The 9 men and no helmets. The 200 levies 8 miles off who had not been paid in a season and were talking about walking home, and the night I spent among them promising things I did not have. The frost on her father's beard. Havard's hands open, his voice low, say anything you like. But if you say my name in front of them, the March goes to war with itself before noon. He was right, I said. That's the part I've never been able to get round. He was right, and I was 22, and I chose the peace. She did not look at me. She had her eyes on the oven mouth. Why did he do it? His brother died at Skello Ford. Your father won that field. I let that sit. That's the reason he'd have given. I've had 14 years to look at it, and I don't think it's the true one. I think he'd worked out that if the war stopped that night, it stopped with me a boy on a new throne and him a man of 30 with a name in the field. And if it didn't stop, I stopped. He is not a monster. I want you to understand that because it will make him harder, not easier. He is a man who is very good at knowing what a thing will cost other people, and very slow at knowing what it costs him. And you let him keep his name. I did. For 14 years. Yes. She turned her head then. Do you know what he's done with those 14 years? Tell me. Grain, she said. In the Gap. Every year. Ferrick sells your Fell Hollow store off in frost month and half of it goes west, and in the Gap it comes back down to the Vales in Crake's carts with Crake's man on the box, and it doesn't get sold, sire. It gets given. 206 men came up that causeway for the muster tonight, and I'd say 100 of them ate his bread in the Gap 2 years running. She sat back. I didn't come here only for you. I've been 6 years getting here. I went where he was first. I sat very still. You've been at Crake's. 19 months, in his kitchen. Her mouth went thin. I could never get near him. He doesn't eat with his household. And you came here because I couldn't reach him, she said, and I could reach you, and because you were the one the whole world had already named. She looked down at her hands. I want to be honest with you since you've been honest with me. When I came up that road, I had no doubt in me at all. It's easy. You've no idea how easy it is when you're certain. When did it stop being easy? The 4th night, she said, the tray run. I'd been out in it 40 times and my hands were done. And when I came in, you took the broken loaf off the rack and ate it yourself instead of putting it in a hungry woman's basket. She shrugged, one shoulder. That's all. It's nothing. It's not evidence of anything, and it doesn't undo a barrow. But a man who's murdered under white cloth doesn't think about the shame of a broken loaf. And I stood there with a tray in my arms and thought, oh no. We sat there. I'm not forgiving you, she said. Understand that. You buried my father's death under your own name to save this country a war, and you were 22, and I dare say I'd have done the same. and I have had 6 weeks to think about it, and I still can't decide whether it was the bravest thing I've ever heard of or the most cowardly. But you took the peace and Oslo paid for it. Every year of my life somebody has said to me, your poor father, going out under cloth to a boy who'd break it, and the whole march has learned from the top down that the cloth means nothing. That's what 14 years bought. You saved 2,000 men and you killed the truce. I had no answer to that. I have never had an answer to that. So I'll not forgive you, she said, but I'll not take payment from you either because you don't owe it. I've been carrying a debt for 14 years and it turns out it was made out to the wrong man. Her voice was steady and awful. Do you know what that's like? I've nothing to do with my hands. Yes, I said, I know exactly what that's like. She looked at me, and something in her face gave a little. Yes, she said, I suppose you do. Out in the yard the rain came on again. She said after a while. What was in the letter? What letter? The one you wrote him when you were 22. She was watching the oven again. They read it out at Oslo twice. But I was 6, and I don't remember it, and everyone who could tell me is dead. I got up and went to the press at the end of the hall and took out the copy, because I have kept a copy of it for 14 years the way a man keeps the thing that ruined him, and I brought it back and put it in her hands, and she read it by the light of the oven mouth. It is 9 lines. It is badly written. It says, in effect, that I have counted our dead and his, and I do not believe either of us can win before the harvest fails, and that I am new and unproved, and he has every reason to think me a boy and no reason at all to trust me, and that I am asking him anyway, and that I will come with 9 and he may come with 9, and that if he does not come, I shall not blame him and shall see him at Harrow Water in the spring. She read it 3 times. Then she folded it very carefully along its old folds and held it against her chest with the flat of her hand, and she put her head back against the warm brick of the oven and shut her eyes, and her face, that face that did not do anything, came apart, all at once, entirely without a sound. I did not touch her. I sat at the far end of the bench with my hands on my knees, and I let her have it, because it was hers and not mine, and it went on a long time. When it was done, she wiped her face with her sleeve, the one with the knife in it, and said, in a perfectly ordinary voice, he'd have come anyway, even if it had been a bad letter. That's the thing about him. That's what I've never been able to make anyone understand. I know, I said, that's why I wrote it. Rook brought Ferric in on the 3rd morning of the muster, along with the ledger, and Ferric did what such men always do, which is to explain for 2 hours and then, at some point in the 3rd, hear his own voice from the outside. He gave us Craik in the end. Not by name, never by name. He called it the Western Contract and the arrangement and looked at the floor, but he gave us the carts and the dates and the man on the box, and he gave us 6 years of it. And when Rook asked him why he had never come to me with it, Ferric looked genuinely puzzled and said, because the march is fed either way, sire. What difference does it make whose hand it's in? And he meant it. That is the thing I have never been able to explain to men who want this to be a story about a villain. He meant it. He had a granary and it was empty when it should have been full and full when it should have been empty, and the loaves still reached the vales, and to Ferric that was the whole of the arithmetic, and he could not for the life of him see the other column. I had him put in the undercroft, not in irons, and told him he would keep his hands and lose his seal, and he wept with relief, which was the worst part of the morning. Rook stayed behind after they took him out. He stood with the ledger under his arm and said nothing for a while. Say it, I said. 6 years, Rook said. 6 years he's been buying this march a fistful at a time, and I've watched the carts go by and called it charity. He put the ledger down on the table very gently, which from Rook is a scream. Sire, there are 206 armed men in your yard tonight, and I could not tell you which way half of them would go. No. And the kindlings in 4 days and every household in the march will be inside these walls. Yes. Then let me take him now, tonight. Quietly. On what? On the grain. The grain isn't a crime, I said. The grain is generosity by a man with a full barn. Take him tonight on the grain, and every vale in the West hears that the Oathbreaker King put his cousin in a hole for feeding the poor, and they'd be half right, and we would be at war inside a month, which is precisely the thing I sold my name to prevent. I shook my head. No. If he goes on the barrow in front of all of them, or he doesn't go at all. Rook stared at me. You'll say it, he said. After 14 years, you'll actually say it. I'll say it. Sire, and his voice did something I had never heard it do. You understand that the moment you say it, the 11 of us are oath breakers too. We swore to you. If we speak now, every man in that yard learns that your second has stood beside you for 14 years knowing, and said nothing, while men spat on the road. I know. I'll take it off you first in front of them. The oath was mine to give, and it's mine to break. That isn't how the march will hear it. No, I said, it isn't. He was quiet a moment. Then he said, well, good, and picked the ledger back up and went out, and that is the closest Anselm Rook has ever come to telling me he loved me. Craik came to her on the day before the kindling. I did not see it. She told me afterward that night, standing in the same place at the wall by the hive shed with the sugar-water dish in her hands. He had come round to the hives. Alone, no men, hood back, hands empty. He is not a fool. He does everything the way a man does it when he wants it remembered a particular way. He admired the skeps. He asked her whether they had come through. She said one had and one was doubtful. He said his mother had kept bees and that he had never had the patience. Then he said, "You're Corin Varden's girl." She said nothing. "You've his jaw," Craik said. "I stood 10 feet from him once at Skello Ford on the wrong end of a bad afternoon. I've never forgotten the face." He looked out at the pines. "How long have you been in this hall?" "Since frost month." "And you've a moon mark to match his." He said it kindly. "That's a filthy thing to be handed, and I'm sorry for it. Nobody will ever let you have your grief now. You know that." "Yes." "Do you want him?" She said, "What?" "My cousin," Craik said. "Do you want him dead because you can have him?" He said it as simply as a man offering to carry a sack. "I don't say it to shock you. I've watched you 4 days and you've not once let him behind you. You've had the whole winter and you've not moved, and I think I know why. I think you've got no way out of this yard afterward, and you're not a fool, and you've been waiting for a hand." He turned to look at her. "Take it. There's a horse at the West Sally Gate on the kindling night, and 11 miles of my country from the gate, and you'll never be found, and the march will have a dead oath-breaker and a story, and Oslo will have what it's owed at last. You needn't even thank me. I'd counted a debt paid on my brother's account." And my cousin stood there in the mud by my mother's hives, 44 years old, with real feeling in his face. I do not doubt that, and I have never doubted it, and waited for the daughter of the man he killed to take his hand. She said, "Why?" "Because he's not fit," Craik said. "Because he spent 14 years baking bread in the middle of the night instead of building a road through the hollow, and this country is being run by a man doing penance, and penance is not government. Because I love him and I have watched him rot, and it would be a kindness." He put his hood up. "And because the march will follow me, and it will be better fed, and you know that too, because you've kept my kitchen." She said, "You knew that." "I knew it in a month," Craik said. "You're not the only one who watches. I let you stay because I wanted to know where you'd go." He smiled at her quite gently. "You went to him. That's the only surprising thing you've ever done." Then he wished her a good night, and went back round the wall. She stood there in the dark for some time with the dish in her hands, and then she went in and fed the bees, and then she came and found me. When she had finished telling me, I said, "There's a horse at the West Sally Gate." "Yes." 11 miles. "Yes." She set the empty dish down on the wall. "Sire, I'm going to ask you a plain thing, and I want a plain answer. Are you fit?" I thought about it properly, because she deserved that. No, I said, not as I've been. He's right about the road, and he's right about the granaries, and he's right that I've spent 14 years feeding this country with my hands because I couldn't govern it with my name. I looked at her. He's wrong that the cure is a lie with better manners, and he is wrong that you can build anything at all on a cloth that means nothing. That's the one thing I know, and he doesn't, and I paid for it, and I'd pay again. She nodded slowly. Then say it tomorrow, she said. In front of all of them. They may not have it. I know. They may take his side, and if they do, the 11 men who speak for me are dead by summer, and so am I. I know, she said. Say it anyway. And then, after a moment, in a lower voice, that's what the cloth is. It's a man agreeing to be easy to kill. You told me that. You wrote it when you were 22 in a bad hand, and my father read it and put his helmet down. The green kindling is the best night of the year in the Harrowmark, and I would not have you think from all this that it is a solemn thing. It is not. It is the night the willow breaks, the first real green in the country, and the march comes in out of the mud to Brandhold with whatever it has left, and the last bake of the Gap goes into the ovens at dusk and comes out at midnight, and the whole yard eats it standing up in the cold, and there is a great deal of very bad singing. It is also the night the hill wolves come down. They always have. Nobody feeds them, and nobody would dare. They come out of the black pine and stand off along the turf beyond the causeway, 40 or 50 of them, and watch the fires and go again before dawn. The march takes it as a blessing on the year. And every kindling of my reign I have gone out to the causeway in my other shape and stood in front of them, as a king of the Harrowmark is supposed to. And every kindling of my reign they have looked at me and not come, and 800 people have watched them not come, and I have walked back up to the gate. 14 years of that. It began well. The yard was full, 400, 500, the levies and the vales and the road folk and the whole of Brandhold, and the ovens were roaring, and the smell was over everything, and Han had the trays going out in a chain, and somebody had brought a fiddle that only had 3 good strings. Craik was everywhere. He is superb at this sort of thing. He carried a tray himself for a while, and got a cheer for it, and put a coin in the fiddler's cap, and stood with his arm round the shoulders of a man from Ferndale who had come after all. At full dark I climbed onto the mounting block by the east ovens, and the yard went quiet in that ragged way a big crowd goes quiet, in patches, with people shushing each other. I said, 14 years ago I sent Corin Varden of Oslo a letter under my own hand, and asked him to meet me at the Grey Barrow under white cloth. You could hear the ovens. He came with 9 men and no helmet. In the morning he was dead on the turf with the cloth still knotted at his shoulder, and 8 of his men with him, and the whole world has known ever since that Osric Brand did it. I looked out at them. I was not at the Grey Barrow. I was 8 miles east at Coldstream with 200 levies who had not been paid in a season. There are 11 living men who were with me that night, and I release every one of them here now, from the oath of silence I laid on them, which was mine to give and is mine to take back, and I ask the march to hold their silence to my account and not to theirs. Rook stepped up onto the block behind me, then old Merrick of the gate, then Dunnel Sturrock, Han's brother, then, one at a time out of the crowd, from 4 different quarters of that yard, the rest of them, and there is nothing in my life I am less able to speak about than watching 8 old men shoulder their way through a crowd to stand beside me on a stone in the cold. I left the barrow in the hands of the man I trusted most in the world, I said, my cousin, Havard Craik. The noise that came up out of that yard was not a roar. I had expected a roar. It was worse. It was a low, wide, shifting sound, hundreds of people all saying something to the person beside them at once, and under it the specific silence of the men who had already made up their minds. Craik came forward. Of course he did. He came out into the open by the fire and put his hands up for quiet and got it, and he did not look frightened, and he did not look angry. He looked sad. "Cousin," he said, "how long have you been ill?" And it very nearly worked. I want to be clear about that, because it is easy afterward to tell it as though the thing was decided. It was not decided. He stood in that firelight and spoke for the length of time it takes bread to cool, and he was gentle, and he was reasonable, and he never once raised his voice, and by the middle of it I could feel the yard going. He spoke about a boy of 22 who had done a terrible thing in a war and had never been able to carry it. About the ovens. You have all eaten his bread, you have all seen a king who cannot sleep. About how a mind will, in the end, put its burden somewhere, and how it usually puts it on the person nearest. "And I have been nearest for 40 years, he said. "I've expected this. I'd rather it had come in a private room." Then he turned and pointed at her. She was standing by the second oven with a peel in her hands, where she had been all night. "And I will tell you what changed," Craig said. "That woman is Corin Varden's daughter. She came into this house under a false name in Frost Month. She has the moon mark on her, and so does he, and she has been at his shoulder every night for 6 weeks, and I ask this March a simple question: whose grief are we hearing tonight, his or hers?" The yard turned, all of it all at once, 500 faces. And I understood, standing on that block, exactly what he had built, and how long he had had to build it, and that it was very good. Because it did not matter now what I said. Every word out of my mouth was a besotted man saying his mate's lines. Rook was a servant lying for his master. The 8 old men were pensioners. He had not answered the charge at all. He had simply made it impossible for the charge to be heard, and he had done it in about 90 seconds, and there was no way through it. Except one. She put the peel down on the rack. She did it carefully, because a peel dropped in a crowd puts an eye out. Then she came out into the space by the fire with her sleeves still shoved to the elbow and her hands white with flour to the wrist, and she stood in front of 500 people and did not look at me at all. She looked at Craig. "My name is Ilse Varden," she said. "He's right. I came here under a false name, and I came here to kill your king, and I've had a blade in my sleeve since Frost Month, and here it is." She drew it and held it up flat on her palm so the fire caught it, and the noise in that yard was like a wave going back off shingle. "So you needn't wonder whose grief you're hearing," she said. "You're hearing mine, and you'll not hear another word out of me about what he is or what he isn't, because I'm the last person in this march fit to say it." She turned to Craig. "I'll ask you one thing instead. You said you stood 10 feet from my father once at Skello Ford." "I did." "You never did," she said. "You weren't at Skello Ford. Your brother was and you weren't. You were 3 days behind with the baggage, and it's in your own muster rolls, and I kept your kitchen for 19 months, and I've heard your own men laugh about it at the fire." Her voice did not rise at all. "So when did you stand 10 feet from my father, my lord?" Nothing at all in that yard. 500 people and the ovens ticking." "You told me you'd never forgotten the face," she said. "The face. Not the man in his helm on a field in the afternoon, the face. He wore no helmet twice in his life, once at his own wedding and once at the Grey Barrow." She let that sit. "You've carried it 14 years, and last night you set it down in front of a beekeeper, because you were being kind to me, and because it never once crossed your mind that a hired girl at a hive would be counting." Craig did not move. His hands were quite still at his sides, and I watched my cousin's face do the only honest thing I have ever seen it do, which was nothing at all. He simply stopped, the way a mill stops when the water goes off, and I saw him look round that yard and find, in about 4 seconds, the exact number of men in it who were now going to follow him, and see that it was not enough. "You keep the Fell Hollow ledger, cousin," I said. "Rook has it here, and the carts and the dates, and 6 years of it. And Ferrick is in my Undercroft and has been talking since Tuesday." Craig turned his head and looked at me for a long moment. "You were 22, he said. "You'd have lost the whole country by the harvest." "Perhaps." "There's no perhaps, Osric. you'd have lost it. His voice was almost pleading, and it was, I think, the truest thing in him. I gave you 14 years. You gave me a name I couldn't put down, I said. And you gave that woman a father in a cart, and you did it under white cloth, and you have spent 14 years being right about roads. It went wrong at the gate, the way these things do. There were perhaps 60 of them, the Western Vales mostly, the men who had eaten out of his carts in 2 bad gaps and were not going to be talked out of it by a granary ledger in one night. They took the gatehouse and the causeway end and put themselves between Craik and my men, and there was a good deal of shouting, and Rook had 200 at the other end of the yard with their hands on their spear shafts, and the whole of it stood there for about a quarter of an hour with 500 women and children and road folk in the middle, and the ovens still going, and I have never in my life been closer to the thing I sold my name to stop. Then somebody up on the wall shouted, and it was a shout with a particular note in it, and everybody stopped. The wolves had come off the turf. They do not do that. In 800 years of the march at the kindling, they stand off beyond the causeway and they watch and they go, and they have never once come up the road. There were more than 50 of them, and they came up out of the black pine, and along the causeway in the dark past 60 armed men who went absolutely rigid and did not so much as breathe, and they came in through my open gate. And they did not come to me. They went down the yard past the mounting block and past Rook's 200 and past the fires, and they lay down, all of them, in that mud, in a rough half-ring around the second oven, where Ilse Varden was standing with her father's knife still flat on her open hand. One of them, a big gray bitch with a bad ear, walked up and put her head against Ilse's hip and stood there. Ilse looked down at her. Then she looked up and across the yard and found me, and the expression on her face was pure, undignified astonishment, and it was the first time I ever saw her look her age. Nobody in that yard moved for a long time. I have heard 40 versions of what it meant since, and I have never given one, and I will not give one here. I will say only what I saw, which was 60 men in a gatehouse looking at 50 wolves lying in the mud around a southern girl in a flower-covered apron, and putting their weapons down, 1 and 2 at a time, without anybody asking them to. They wanted to hang him, understand that. By the time the sun came up, the march had swung the whole way over, the way a crowd does, and it wanted a rope, and it wanted it in the yard where the fires had been, and the loudest voices in it were the Vales that had been holding the gate at midnight. That is what a country is. I have stopped being angry about it. They brought him out at noon. He had not been touched. He had asked for a razor and been given one, and he had shaved, and he came out into that yard in a clean shirt with his hands loose at his sides, and I will say this for my cousin. He did not once look for a way out, and he did not once ask. I stood on the block. Ilse Varden stood at the foot of it with the hill wolves gone back to the pines, and Hans Sturrock's hand round her arm. The right is Oslo's, I said. Not mine. He killed a warden of Oslo under cloth, and there is one Varden left in the world, and she is standing there, and I'll not take her right off her in front of you the way this march has taken everything else off her family. I looked down at her. It's yours. Say it and it's done. She came up onto the block. She stood there in the cold noon with 500 people waiting, and she looked at Havard Craik for a long time, and I do not know what she saw. I have asked her. She has never told me. Then she said, "Bring me a white cloth." The yard made a sound. "Bring me a white cloth," she said again, and hand, bless her, 61 years old and quicker than any of us, tore a strip off a baked cloth on the rack and put it into her hands. Ilse Varden came down off the block and crossed the mud, and knotted a white cloth at the shoulder of the man who had killed her father, in front of the entire harrow mark. "There," she said, "now you're under it." Craik looked at her. It is the only time I ever saw him at a loss. "You'll go out of this gate under cloth," she said, "and no hand will be laid on you, and you'll go south to the coast and take ship, and you'll not come back into this march while you live. You'll go with nothing. Your name comes off the roll and off the gate at Craikholt and out of the muster book, and in 50 years there'll be nobody in the West who can tell you from a story. Her voice was perfectly level and it carried to the back of that yard. And you'll live. You'll live a long time, I expect. You're strong and you're careful, and you'll be an old man in a warm country, a long way from anyone who knows what you did, and you'll have every single hour of it to yourself. Girl, he said. I'm not doing it for you. She stepped back from him. My father put his helmet down because a boy wrote him a letter. That's all the cloth is. It's a man agreeing to be easy to kill. You proved it's worth nothing, and this whole country has believed you for 14 years, and every warden and every Valeman from here to the sea has learned that only a fool goes out under it. She turned round and looked at all of them. So I'm going to make it worth something again, and I can only do it the one way, which is to put it on the worst man in this march and then keep it. That's the price. It's supposed to hurt. If it only covers the men we like, it isn't a truce, it's a favor. Nobody said anything. He goes out under cloth, she said, and the next time somebody in this country puts it on, they'll remember that the Vardens kept it when they had every right in the world not to. That's what my father's for, not this. She walked back to the block and stopped at the bottom of it, and I saw her hands were shaking, and she put them behind her back so the yard would not see, and I have loved her from that exact moment in a way I have never been able to put into any word that has a shape. They opened the gate. He went out under a strip of baked cloth with 60 of the men who had held that gate for him at midnight standing in silence on either side of the causeway, and nobody spat and nobody threw anything, because they had just been told, in front of everyone, what they were. He turned once at the end of the causeway. He was too far off to see his face. Then the pines took him, and that was the last of Havard Craik, and as far as I know, he is alive to this day. We were married in the summer, and I will not describe it, because it was small and it was ours, and the march got quite enough that year. The road through Fell Hollow was begun in the autumn, in stone, and it took 4 years, and it is the single most useful thing I have done as a king. And the granary at the end of it is full in frost month and empty in the green, and its keeper reports to Hans Sturrock's brother, who cannot be charmed by anybody. I have never got back what 14 years took off my name, and I do not expect to. There are men who still cross the road when I ride past, because it is not easy for a country to admit that it enjoyed the story more than it wanted the truth, and I find I do not mind them nearly as much as I once minded the others. The ovens still go, all 6 from the first hard frost to the green. Ilse runs them now. She is far better at it than I ever was, and she is extremely unpleasant about it. And there is one more thing, which is the thing I actually wanted to tell you, and I have taken a long way round to it. She had the knife ground down. She took it to Merrick's forge the week after the kindling and had 8 inches of it taken back to 3, and the edge put on the curve, and the point taken off entirely, and she brought it back and hung it on the nail over the second oven. It is a lame. That is the tool you score a loaf with, the little curved blade you draw across the top before it goes in, so the crust opens where you tell it to. She uses it every night. 400 loaves a night through the gap, and every one of them gets a cut from Corin Varden's knife, and there is not one soul in that hall now who thinks anything of it at all, which I believe is exactly what she was after. I asked her about it once, years on. It was late and the bake was in, and we were sitting on the bench by the 3rd oven where all of this started, and I was eating a heel of the second bake, tasting it, the way I have tasted everything every day since a wet night in frost month, when a girl with red hands stood at my shoulder. I said, "Do you ever think of putting it back the way it was?" And she said, "You give it a wound so it doesn't make its own," and reached over and took the heel out of my hand and ate half of it, and did not say anything else, and never has.